The story of the John Deere B is not just the story of a tractor. It is the story of families, of survival through dust, mud, economic collapse, and stubborn hope carved into iron and steel. Long before farming became a business powered by satellites and computers, it depended on machines that had to be simple, unforgiving, and alive in the hands of those who worked the land. The John Deere B was born into that world, and its fate would be shaped by forces far greater than metal alone. Before we go deeper into this story, if you are enjoying this kind of historical and mechanical content, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, because we truly need your support to help this channel grow. We are still a small channel, and every subscription, every like, and every share with a friend who loves agricultural machines makes a real difference. Your support is what allows stories like this to keep being told. The John Deere B emerged at a moment when American agriculture stood on the edge between tradition and mechanized transformation. The land was vast, labor was brutal, and the demand for efficiency grew stronger every year. Horses were still common, steam engines were heavy and expensive, and many farmers could not afford large tractors designed for industrial-scale operations. What they needed was something different. A lightweight, affordable, and reliable machine that could work small and medium farms without draining every dollar they had. This is where the John Deere B entered the scene. Designed as a compact row crop tractor, it carried a simple but clever mechanical philosophy. It was never about brute force. It was about balance. Balance between power and economy. Balance between durability and accessibility. Balance between what farmers dreamed of and what they could actually afford to buy. Its design reflected the reality of rural America, not the ambitions of distant corporate offices. At its heart, the John Deere B carried a two-cylinder engine, a configuration that became a signature of the brand for decades. This engine did not chase speed. It delivered torque in a slow, deliberate rhythm that farmers could feel through the steering wheel, through the seat, through the soil itself. It was the kind of power that pulled plows through stubborn earth, that turned belt drives in dusty barns, that refused to quit under heat, mud, or neglect. The early years of the John Deere B unfolded during a time of deep uncertainty. The Great Depression still haunted the economy, and many farmers lived on the edge of collapse. Every purchase was a risk. Every machine had to justify its existence daily. When the John Deere B arrived, it promised something rare: mechanical independence. It allowed a single farmer to replace multiple animals, to work faster, and to control the timing of planting and harvesting with a precision that had been impossible just a few years earlier. What made the John Deere B truly revolutionary was not only its engineering but its role in daily life. It did not belong to factories or cities. It belonged to open fields, wooden fences, weathered hands, and families who measured time not by clocks, but by seasons. Children learned to drive on it. Fathers depended on it. Entire harvests relied on it. When the engine started at dawn, it meant food on the table months later. The sound, the vibrations, the unmistakable shape of its frame became woven into rural memory across entire regions of the United States. The John Deere B was not glamorous. It was not designed to impress. It was designed to endure. And endure it did. Year after year, field after field, under rain, under dust, under punishing summer heat and freezing winter starts. As production expanded, the tractor found its way into thousands of farms that had never seen mechanized power before. For many families, the John Deere B was the first machine that truly changed the way they worked the land. It shortened workdays, reduced physical suffering, and introduced a new rhythm to agricultural life. Milestones were no longer measured only in acres plowed by horse, but in hours saved by steel. Yet even in its rise, the seeds of its future transformation were already present. Technology never rests. Markets never freeze in time. What begins as revolutionary eventually becomes routine. And what becomes routine eventually faces replacement. The John Deere B was climbing toward its peak in a world that was already preparing to move beyond it. At this stage of its story, the tractor stood as a symbol of progress, resilience, and mechanical honesty. It was trusted without hesitation. It was repaired with simple tools. It survived mistakes, overloads, and years of relentless labor. But history, as it always does, was quietly approaching with new demands, new technologies, and new expectations that would challenge everything the John Deere B represented. The question was no longer how the John Deere B was born. The question slowly became something else, far heavier and far more unsettling. What would happen to it when the world no longer needed it the way it once did? By the time the John Deere B fully settled into American farmland, it was no longer seen as a novelty. It became a constant, a partner in work, a tool so familiar that many farmers stopped seeing it as a machine and began treating it as part of the family's own rhythm. Morning routines changed. Fields expanded. Tasks that once demanded entire days of exhausting labor were now compressed into fewer hours. The John Deere B did not just work the land. It reshaped time itself for rural communities. During its golden years, this tractor was everywhere. From flat cornfields stretching to the horizon, to hilly plots where traction meant survival, the John Deere B proved that a small and affordable tractor could still deliver real agricultural power. It handled plowing, harrowing, planting, mowing, and belt-driven farm equipment with an efficiency that reshaped the economics of small farming. What once required hired crews now often required only one operator and one dependable machine. The reputation of the John Deere B grew not through advertising promises, but through results. Farmers talked. Neighbors watched. When a family managed to bring in a full harvest after storms, delays, or setbacks, the tractor earned its place in stories told across fence lines and at local supply stores. Trust was built in seasons, not in slogans. The John Deere B became known not for luxury, but for consistency. What made this period truly special was the emotional bond that formed between machine and owner. This tractor was not upgraded every few years. It stayed. It aged alongside the people who depended on it. Scratches on the metal became memories of difficult harvests. Worn controls reflected thousands of hours of repetition. Repairs were done not by distant specialists, but by the hands that also guided it across the field. As the years passed, the John Deere B became a bridge between generations. Fathers taught sons. Sons taught daughters. Learning to operate the tractor became a rite of passage. It represented responsibility, trust, and the first true step into the world of adult labor. The tractor did not merely move earth. It moved identity forward from one generation to the next. At the height of its success, few questioned its place in the future. It seemed permanent. Yet beneath this apparent stability, the agricultural world was changing rapidly. Farms were growing larger. Demands for higher efficiency increased. Expectations shifted toward comfort, speed, and versatility. The humble strengths that once defined greatness slowly began to feel limited against the rise of new designs. Even so, during these golden years, the John Deere B still ruled countless acres with quiet authority. It did not compete with newer machines through sophistication. It competed through loyalty. Farmers knew what it could do. They understood its limits. And within those limits, it rarely failed. But progress is rarely kind to legends built on simplicity. The decline of the John Deere B did not arrive with noise or drama. It arrived quietly, disguised as progress. New tractors began to appear in the fields, machines that carried more power, more comfort, and far greater versatility. What once seemed revolutionary now faced comparison. And comparison, in the world of machinery, is often unforgiving. Farms across the United States were changing. Operations grew larger. Fields expanded beyond what a compact tractor could efficiently handle. Time became a pressure measured not in days, but in narrow windows dictated by weather, contracts, and scale. Where the John Deere B once represented freedom from exhaustion, It now began to represent limitation. It could still work. It could still pull. But the demands placed on agriculture had evolved beyond what it was built to satisfy. Hydraulic systems became more advanced. Power takeoff systems grew stronger and more standardized. Multi-speed transmissions allowed operators to fine-tune performance. New tractors offered enclosed stations, reducing fatigue and exposure to harsh conditions. The John Deere B, loyal and dependable as it was, belonged to a generation that accepted discomfort as part of the job. The new machines promised something different: endurance with comfort, force with precision. For many farmers, the decision to replace a John Deere B was not emotional at first. It was economic. Larger equipment meant covering more land in less time. Greater efficiency meant surviving in an increasingly competitive market. What had once been enough was no longer enough. The same tractor that had built livelihoods now struggled to keep pace with the systems that had grown around it. Slowly, the John Deere B was pushed from the front lines of farm work. It moved from primary operations to secondary roles. From plowing major fields to pulling smaller implements. From full-time service to occasional use. And eventually, in many cases, to storage. Parked behind barns. Left beneath open sheds. Resting in tall grass that slowly reclaimed its tires and frame. This was not abandonment born of failure. It was displacement born of modernization. The tractor still started, still moved, still performed its basic duties. But the world now demanded more than basic reliability. It demanded speed, scale, and adaptability. Qualities the John Deere B was never designed to provide in excess. Generations who grew up with the John Deere B began to age along with it. Younger farmers, trained on newer equipment, often saw the old machine as outdated. They respected it, but they did not depend on it. What once symbolized progress now symbolized memory. The shift was subtle, but irreversible. Many units were sold at low prices. Some were traded. Others were simply left where they stood after their last useful season. Parts became harder to source through regular dealerships. Knowledge about its mechanical behavior slowly faded as newer systems replaced old routines. The skills that once defined mastery over the John Deere B were no longer widely taught. Yet, even in decline, the tractor refused to disappear completely. In pockets of rural America, it continued to operate far beyond what anyone expected. In small farms, in isolated plots, in communities where simplicity still mattered more than speed, the John Deere B kept moving soil, pulling tools, and proving that endurance often outlives relevance. But history is relentless. And relevance, once lost, rarely returns without transformation. When the John Deere B finally stepped away from the center of agricultural life, its story did not end. It changed form. What once existed only to work began to exist to be remembered, preserved, and understood. Across the United States, thousands of these tractors entered a strange new phase of existence. Some were forgotten completely, dissolving slowly into the soil they once shaped. Others were saved by hands that refused to let a symbol of an era vanish. In the decades that followed its decline, the John Deere B quietly became something no one had planned when it was first designed. It became a historical artifact. What had once been purchased strictly for survival in the fields was now sought after for preservation. Barns that once stored feed and tools began to shelter restored tractors. Old paint was stripped away. Engines were carefully rebuilt. Parts that no longer existed in regular circulation were hunted through private collections, auctions, and workshops hidden deep in rural towns. This transformation was not driven by profit at first. It was driven by identity. For many families, restoring a John Deere B meant restoring memory itself. It meant honoring parents and grandparents who had trusted that machine with their livelihoods. Each restored tractor became a physical biography, carrying marks of labor that no factory could reproduce. Even when repainted, the soul of long work remained embedded in its structure. Over time, a collector culture was born. What had once been dismissed as obsolete now carried emotional and historical value. Tractor shows, rural festivals, and exhibitions turned the John Deere B into a centerpiece of agricultural heritage. Crowds gathered not to watch it compete, but to remember what it represented. People no longer asked what it could pull. They asked where it had worked, who had owned it, and what stories it carried. Today, the fate of the John Deere B exists in several realities at once. Some units remain abandoned, slowly returning to rust and earth in forgotten fields. Others live inside climate-controlled buildings, treated with the same care given to classic automobiles. Some still operate on small properties, not out of necessity, but out of loyalty and respect. Each fate reflects a different relationship between humans and machines. Its market value, once determined by utility alone, shifted toward rarity, condition, and historical authenticity. A machine that once existed to save time now exists to preserve it. The John Deere B no longer fights against the clock of rotations and harvests. It stands against the erosion of memory itself. What truly happened to the John Deere B was not destruction. It was transformation. It moved from labor to legacy, from necessity to remembrance, from the center of production to the center of identity for those who once depended on it. The same steel that once battled soil now battles forgetting. The tractor that once symbolized survival through hardship now symbolizes endurance through time. It stands today not as a competitor in modern agriculture, but as a witness to how far that world has traveled. Fields have grown wider. Machines have grown more complex. Yet the spirit of the John Deere B remains locked inside every restored engine, every preserved frame, every memory passed quietly from one generation to the next. Its story did not fade when the fields changed. It followed the people who once needed it, into memory, into preservation, and into history itself.